Side is N2EST. I've been licensed since 1973, and I've been a ham most of my life, but I think I'm kind of an outlier. My experience has been most amateur radio operators are more in left-brain professions. They usually do things that are technically oriented. I've been a cartoonist and a designer my entire life. I've been making animated cartoons since I was 9. Worked in comic books, worked on staff at Marvel Comics. That's where I got the 2 call. For many years, I did illustrations for ARRL publications during the 80s and 90s. So if you've got some of those older books and older issues of QST, you might have seen my work. And more recently, I've been doing illustrations for Gordon West. The latest extra class book has my illustrations in it. Currently, the day job is working at the Oklahoma Gazette, where I'm an illustrator and a graphic designer. In fact, if you pick up the current Oklahoma Gazette, my illustration's on the front cover. But one of the things I'm passionate about is QSLs. I have a website devoted to QSLs, primarily cartoon QSLs, because that's my thing. I was talking with Ed a few months ago and suggested the idea of doing a presentation on QSL. And he was up for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain a little bit about what QSLs are. This is going to be old hat for the old timers. But for the newer hams, it'll be interesting, I would hope. And then the second half of the presentation will be a little bit about what I think goes into a good QSL card. There are some technical basics, but I like QSLs that look nice. So maybe I can offer some advice there, tell you a little bit about printing them, what goes into a QSL card. But I'm going to start it off with a story, and some of you, and may have experienced this if you're of a certain age. I was licensed in '73. Who here remembers Little Print Shop? Okay. Back in the days when QSLs were everything, there was a company called Little Print Shop down in Texas. I don't know if they're even still in business. And they would get the mailing list of everybody who got new licenses, QSL cards. So if you were a novice during those days or before then, all the QSL cards looked the same because they all came from Little Print Shop, either them or Russ Print. And sometimes those mailings were so fast, you found out your call sign from them before you found it out from the FCC. And that's how I found out my first call sign, WN9MVD. So, why QSL? It's kind of old school. Courtesy. It used to be that a QSL card was considered the final courtesy of a QSO or a contact. You know, it was nice to get a card from somebody, so that's part of it. Awards. Say you want to go for worked all states, worked all continents, that sort of thing. DXCC, you got to have proof that you actually talked to those stations. Now you can get it through Logbook of the World, but it's nice to have the card, and it's kind of cool to get a card from somewhere else in the world. And finally, tradition. It is so much a part of our tradition. They don't send out QSL cards as much as they used to, but they are still out there. And on my blog about why sending QSL cards, because to me this cuts to the heart of it. You hear this question asked dozens of times in person, on the air, and over social media, and it's a good question. Postcards, okay, for those of you who don't know, a QSL card is a postcard, usually 3.5 by 5.5, used to verify a contact. They take time to fill out, they're expensive to print and mail, then you have to wait for them to arrive. And Logbook of the World, you get it almost immediately. And I have nothing against Logbook of the World. I use it myself, and almost every other ham I know does. It's a great system, and I think the ARRL is to be commended for having it. But the thing is, it's push-button easy. And if we hams wanted nothing but push-button easy, wouldn't we all be talking to each other on our smartphones? At heart, amateur radio is a pastime, and we pass the time in different ways. Some of us like to tinker and build. Some of us are in for public service. I like to rag chew. And a QSL is kind of a memento of that. To Scotland, and when she got there, she mailed us a postcard, just like a QSL. That means she took the time to choose a colorful card, to write us a quick note, and to drop it in a mailbox. That's what friends do. QSL cards used to be called the final courtesy of a QSO, and in a world increasingly marred by incivility, we could all use one more courtesy. Besides, I can think of no better way to explain the hobby to our non-ham friends than via a QSL card. Okay, imagine you've just made a new friend on the other side of the world via ham radio, and you want to share that thrill with a visitor to your shack. We're all about recruiting, right? Telling people what a wonderful hobby this is. Okay, point out a log entry or something on a computer screen, and what do you think they're going to say? Okay, show them a QSL card. Cool. Yes, exactly. And you'll get a much different response. That's what the ham looks like? That's their station? You mean they cared enough to send you a postcard after you talked? Yes. Computer log entries are intangible to the rest of the world. QSLs are something you can hold in your hand. They're not for every ham, of course, or even for every QSO, but if you want to make a friend via amateur radio, there's nothing better. Okay. Again, this is old hat for the old timers, but for the newer hams, QSL card, it's derived from the Q sign, QSL. QSL means, if it's a question mark, can you acknowledge receipt? QSL means I am acknowledging receipt if it's not followed by a question mark. Newer hams, you all know what Q signs are? QRM, that sort of thing. QSO, okay. Anyway, that's where that comes from. This is the information you have to have on your QSL card for it to be valid. It's got to have call signs, location, time and date, frequency, mode, and signal report. That's all it has to have in order to be valid. Stuff on there like rig and antenna, your power, mobile or portable, ITU or CQ zone, grid square, previous call signs, email address, clubs. Those are all fine, but those are optional. They're nice to have, but they're optional. Now, your QSL can be anything. And Bill, show them the QSL card you got, probably the most interesting one.
This is a 100 Intis bill from Peru. I worked this guy in 1992 while I was mobile on 10 meters. And he sent the bill with my call sign on it, the date, the frequency, signal report, and then on the back wrote, thanks for the QSO and QSL card. So it's a little different.
But that's a valid QSL card. You could turn that in for an award, and it would count. But it's a little on the unusual side. It's better if you do it right. Not that there's anything wrong with that. You could put a QSL, you could write it on a napkin and hand it to the guy, and it would work. But it's better if you do it right. What you want is what the U.S. Postal Service wants. It's got to be rectangular, at least 3.5 inches high by 5 inches long by a certain thickness. No bigger than 4 1/4 by 6 inches long and 0.016 inches thick. The ideal size is the size most of us grew up with, which is 3.5 by 5.5. 3.5 tall, 5.5 wide. This is why. It's the people who process QSLs for awards, your DX QSL bureaus, that sort of thing. Even the hangers you get to put QSL cards on your wall, they're all geared to 3.5 by 5.5. Now, I'd actually sent an email to our QSL manager in Oklahoma. Let me find it here. And I asked him that question. I said, is it really necessary to have your QSL card that size? Pull it out here. It's Gene Lewis, W5LE, and he recently took over the QSL Bureau for the 5 area, and he says he's happy to report that most hams adhere to the standard card size. I guess there'll always be the oddballs who make their cards bigger. What I've found is it's a guarantee that the edges of the card will be mangled by the time they reach their final destination. Also, the bigger QSLs don't fit particularly well into the pigeonholes I have for letters of the alphabet. Not a good idea, but as I said, that's not something most hams do, thankfully. As I've gotten back into the hobby in the last few years, I've noticed more non-standard QSL cards. They're just a little bit bigger, and I think the reason is, first of all, that the print paper that a lot of people get when they print out on their home computers is geared toward a personal photograph, and it's like 4 by 6. Also, buying QSL, postcards rather, think about it. When's the last time you got a personal postcard in the mail? When's the last time you got an advertising postcard in the mail? And if somebody's gonna do an advertising postcard, they want something that's bigger so they can jam as much information on it as possible. So that's why you see more of those. That's exactly what I need. Thanks.
About empty. You want me to put some water?
Actually, there's a little water cup right there.
Oh, okay.
But if you're starting from scratch, it's better not to go there. Stick with 3.5 by 5.5. Let's see. Three different ways you can send QSL cards. You can send them direct. You get the guy's address, usually on qrz.com. You put it in an envelope or you put a stamp on it, you mail it to him, he mails you one back. That's the easiest way to do it. It's often the most expensive way too. I'm gonna cut down to the one here via a QSL manager. For those of you who are new into the hobby, DX stations, they often have QSL managers to handle their QSL cards. Let's say you're on a DXpedition, you're gonna be inundated with hundreds of requests, thousands of requests for QSL cards. Do you really wanna deal with that? And do you really want to mail them all from wherever it is you are? It's gonna be expensive. Not only that, chances are most of the hams who are requesting the QSL card are American anyway. So a lot of times what they have is a stateside QSL manager. They send them the log and say, send out these QSLs for these contacts here, and so they send them out from the United States, and it costs a lot less to send them from here. It's via bureaus. The ARRL has both. I've never used the outgoing QSL bureau, but I have used the incoming QSL bureau. In the old days, you would send them a self-addressed stamped envelope, and there's a QSL bureau for every single call district, but you work with the call district that matches your number in your call sign. Most of you have 5s in your call sign. I have a 2 from when I lived in New York City. So the QSL bureau I work from is the one in New Jersey, that one right there. And as you can see, the envelope followed me. It was originally mailed to where I lived in Lilburn, Georgia, and then followed me to McKaysville, Georgia. And it had maybe 4 or 5 QSL cards in it. It had been sitting there, I don't know, I had gotten an envelope from them for maybe, I don't know, a few years. I don't do that much DXing. But that's what they look like. Usually these are run by clubs, DX clubs, or individuals who are dedicated to this sort of thing. And they collect the cards from DX stations, and DX stations, they can send them in bulk, or they can send them through their local club and it gets sent in bulk. It's a lot cheaper for everybody, maybe for a while, maybe for a year or two, while they accumulate enough cards to make it worth sending to you. As I said, in the old days, you used to send them a self-addressed stamped envelope. Now what they're doing is generally, they want you to pay via PayPal or something like that, which is really a lot easier for everybody involved. They've got your money on hand, they've got an envelope, and when they accumulate enough cards to make it worth the trouble to send them to you, they send them to you. The outgoing QSL Bureau, has anybody used the outgoing QSL Bureau?
Yeah, we've done it as a club.
Uh-huh. How often do you do it?
Not often enough.
See that? Well, how
So
many?
much of it goes by logbook of the world these days. If the number of cards has gone down so much. Bill, when was the last time we did that? It's probably 2 years.
If you're sending like 30 cards, they've changed the rating here some time ago, and I couldn't tell you what it is. So like 30 cards or less, it's X number of dollars.
Right.
More than that, then it's by weight.
Right.
I mean, if you pool it in a club, or an ARRL club, you get a discount on that. I'm not going to the details of it, but yeah, so we have done that.
There, did you?
I was just gonna add something, your comment.
Go ahead.
About outgoing, I handle, St. Lucia
Uh-huh.
for the expedition that we do every year. And, the only thing you have to be aware of on the outgoing QSL cards is that some countries do not have a bureau. So you have that means that you have to send it to them directly.
Mhm.
And so consequently, when, on our website, we tell people, you send us 2 green stamps, $2,
Yeah.
and we'll get the card to you. But there's areas where they don't have a bureau, the bureau can't get the card physically to them
Mhm.
because there's no infrastructure for it. So you're just stuck with going direct, which is okay. I mean, I've done a lot of both. We send
Couple dollars, or how's that
couple
usually?
bucks is always the easiest.
Uh-huh. The
'Cause
way,
I've gotten money from $2 from all over the world, and you just take a regular sheet of paper and fold it in and put the QSL card in front of it or behind it, so that it's not really obvious.
yeah,
When I send money, I hide it in the incoming the envelope that's gonna come back to me, and I put a little notation on the card saying, you know, funds, QSL funds in envelope or something like that, so they can see it.
Mhm.
But, I've never had an incident where money's gotten stolen, and I send stuff to Russia all the time, and never have an issue. I never have, it always goes through for me.
I've been told when you mail out of the country, especially, it's a good idea to not put anything indicating amateur radio.
No,
I mean-
just put a home address, and that's it.
Right, we love to say our name followed by our call sign. Don't do it, because somebody who's unscrupulous might see that envelope and say, aha, there's money in
Well,
there.
if they just see an address and no name, it has no meaning.
Exactly. Do you go back to the days when they used international reply coupons?
Yes.
Okay. How many guys have used IRCs? Okay, for the younger hams, what you used to have to do, if you wanted to pay for a QSL coming back, you'd have to go to your post office and buy something called international reply coupons. They were, I think it was the International Telecommunications Union who issued them.
Yeah, they still exist.
Do they?
Yeah.
You know, a couple of years ago, I went to a post office in Atlanta to try to get some, and they looked at me like I was crazy.
That was something else.
Last time I bought some that were $2.40 each.
Uh-huh. An international reply coupon is good for postage in any country that's a member of the International Telecommunications Union, International Postal Union, which is most countries.
Does the post office sell them anymore?
I was just looking that up.
You have to ask them, and sometimes you actually have to educate them, but you can't.
Yeah, in Atlanta, which is a big town, I had to go to several post offices before I could get anybody to cooperate with me. But you can get them directly. It's a good idea to accommodate whatever they need in order to send the card back. And they will usually tell you on their QRZ.com page. They'll say,
It might be worth mentioning also that Club Log on the computer has an OQRS system, an online QSL reply system.
huh,
And you can go to Club Log and check your call sign and request a direct or a bureau card.
now you're requesting a card as opposed to electronically verifying like you do with Logbook of the World.
Right, you're requesting a card,
Okay,
and they'll send it either direct for $5 or $6, or they'll send it bureau free.
I did not know that.
Yep, Club Log.
Okay, anybody who's got any questions about that, ask your name and call.
Bill Robertson, N5AQ.
Okay, ask N5AQ, and I'm gonna ask you at the end, too. My experience has been, and what I understand is for the electronic logs, the only one that's reliably good for awards is Logbook of the World.
Club Log was great.
But that's,
Yes,
okay, but the only one that's electronic only,
it's
the
LG.
Logbook of the World. There's an EQSL where you get a printout of a QSL card, which is kind of cool, but it really doesn't count for anything. And frankly, I'd rather get a postcard than get a printout from online. But anyway, what I want to go on to next is something that I can contribute here. Design principles for QSL cards. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. As I mentioned, I work as a graphic designer at the Gazette, and worked as a graphic designer in a lot of different places as well. My experience at the Gazette is, if they buy an advertisement, they want to cram everything into it. Everything. And I've seen the same thing on QSL cards. Just because you have 3.5 by 5.5 inches of space doesn't mean you should try to put everything into it, like, 5 photographs and every club you belong to. I mean, think about it. Most people are not gonna see the QSL. I mean, if it's a nice QSL, you're gonna put it on your wall, not this far away. Simplicity is usually best. So what I recommend, one central theme, resist the urge to use too many special effects, and this is one of the things I hate about the fact that you can do graphics on a computer now. You can put a glow on the letters, you can put drop shadows on the letters, you can wave the letters around, you can put multicolors on them, and I find a lot of people do that just because they've got a button that will allow them to do that, they do it. Resist the urge, resist the urge. Make it readable at arm's length, and generally, for design, no more than 2 fonts. They should be complementary. Say maybe one that's got a serif, which is that little foot at the end, like on that flag there where it says NFD, and a font that doesn't have a serif on it, that doesn't have a feet, like say Helvetica or Arial. Most of you are familiar with that with your computers. And this is what you get when you try to combine too many fonts.
Yeah.
It looks like a ransom note. This was actually a joke. This was done by a friend of my wife's. And they made this was a one-off QSL as a joke. But it's funny for a minute, but then you can't read it. And so I went through my collection of QSL cards, and I wanted to show you what simplicity looks like. Everybody thinks you've got to do something fancy with your QSL card. This can work. I basically went through older QSL cards because the newer QSL cards didn't show as much restraint, and people were trying to do them themselves. It's got the basic information. It's got call signs. In that particular case, it's got a map of Hawaii, call signs, names. That's 3-color. You could get a little color by printing on colored stock, for example, if you can't afford full-on color. But those are some examples of very simple QSL cards. Here's some more. Very simple. Some of them have the information on the back. Some of them have the information on the front. If you do it on the front, you can print it cheaper. That means you have to print only on one side. And there's a school of thought that says, if awards, they like to see everything on one side because that way they don't have to flip the card over. They will accept the card that's got everything, things on 2 sides, but they like it better on one. Now I've got a QSL card personally that has it both ways. I've got everything on one side, including my call sign, but I've got a nice graphic on the other. But those are some of the examples of what you can do. That's got everything on one side, it's got a little map of Britain. It's very simple, but I think that's kind of cool because you get the QSL card and you're thinking, most people don't know where the big cities are in Britain, except maybe London. Where is that guy? That's exactly where he is. And you can do the same thing with an American QSL card. Because most foreigners, they don't know where most of the cities are except the big ones, like New York and Los Angeles, Washington, D.C. Maybe they don't know where Oklahoma City is. Do a map with a little dot in the middle. This is exactly who you're talking to. And I threw these in because I thought they were kind of interesting. Do you recognize that name up there?
Oh, yeah.
That's who it is.
Oh, my.
I was mentioning, this is unrelated to this, but it was kind of demonstrative of that kind of this in. About a year ago, I did a presentation, or a piece for Amateur Radio Newsline about Gary Shandling. When he died, somebody came out of the woodwork on Ham Tunes and said, oh, I went to high school with this guy, and he had copies of his QSL cards. And that was his novice card up there. That was his general class card when he upgraded. And when he passed away, Judd Apatow, the director, put up a picture of Gary Shandling as a teenage ham. Anyway, we're talking about QSLs that do it both ways that are very simple. Here's another example. You got the call sign on the front. You almost doesn't have to have that other side there, but see, this is an example where everything is on one side. Got the month, day, and year, He's got the time, oh, that's something else. Time always has to be universal coordinated time. That way, everybody is on the same clock. Don't do it in local time, do it in UTC. Frequency, signal report, mode. This is something else that's on most QSL cards. It's a box. It's either please QSL or thank you for the QSL. Sometimes you do it where it says please QSL thanks, and there's a box on one end, a box on the other end, and you just check the one you want, whether it's thank you, I already got your QSL, and then cross out the other side. But that's what the guy did here. I had obviously already sent him a QSL card, so he thanked me for it. And that way I knew I didn't have to send him one.
If you send the QSL card in an envelope, you're paying the postage for the envelope. If you send it as a card, a postcard, you pay the postcard price, which is a lot cheaper
That's true.
to do. So if you have this type of, where are you gonna put their address?
Well, that I thought was overkill, because if he had left that off the other side, he could have flipped it over, put the addresses on both sides, and paid only the postcard rate. Design it so everything's on one side, and you can send it as a postcard, because you are right, it is cheaper. Now, if you're one of those people who has a really fancy QSL card that's on both sides, or, you know, if you want to send it to a foreign country and you maybe don't want everybody to know that's what you're sending, especially if you're putting in a little money with it, it doesn't really make any difference what you do. But if you want to go cheap, you can do that. I put this one up here. This is the illustration I've had on my QSL for many years, and you would think I had a really fancy QSL for many years. That is not true. It's only recently that it went into color. That was in black and white, two-sided, but it was set up in such a way that I could use this as a postcard, because this was here, and I could put the address right over here. So it was printed on both sides, and I brought it to Kinko's. I didn't have any money for color, so I printed it on color stock. I think it was about that color too. It was kind of a light canary yellow. And if you're thinking that, wow, I've got to spend a lot of money to get a QSL card, you do not. This is what I do now. I eventually sprung for color, and a lot fancier. I've got all of that information on the back. I've got a little map of Oklahoma, shows where Oklahoma City is. I've got information like county, the various zones, grid square, email address, a little plug for myself, but you don't have to have all of that. Here's some of the things you can put on your QSL. You and your shack. I love to see QSL cards where I'm seeing the guy that I just talked with. Love to see what kind of equipment he has. I mean, when you pick up QST or CQ or something like that, don't you like to see other people's shacks? I know I do. It's interesting to see what everybody else has. How about your other hobbies? You do have other hobbies other than ham radio, don't you? For those of you who do, local landmarks. Now, what is that thing over off the highway, the scissor tail? That, okay, or the Oklahoma City skyline, or for those here in Norman, maybe something to do with OU. Those are things you can put there. Well, I went to the University of Georgia, so. Hey. Anyway. These are some examples of QSL cards. This is not great design necessarily, but they're interesting. And I wanted to put these up because they're not necessarily examples of professional design, but they're examples of things you can do. That guy has a picture of a station there, and a little inset, he's got a picture of one of his antennas. One thing I do disagree with, he's got an Italian amateur radio station with those white lines around it. It's kind of hard to read at that size. That's an example of getting carried away with what you can do on a computer. Doesn't look too bad on the call sign because that's nice and big. But I'll give him a pass because none of these guys are professionals except that one right there. That's my dad, by the way. And that's a nice QSL. That's one that I would like to get. Here's another one with the guy's station. I think it's got a little too much going on there. You know, I might have eliminated one of those photographs, simplified it a little bit, but it's kind of nice to see the guy's station, to see what the guy looks like, what his antenna farm looks like. Talk about hobbies. This guy's got a cat. You have a cat, you have a dog, somebody hangs out in the shack, put that on your QSL card. And this one is one that I did for my dad. That's his shack. My dad's very inactive, but he is also a ham radio operator. One thing to remember, if you use a photograph to print out a QSL card, generally it is always going to print it darker than what it looks like in your hand or on a computer screen. So always make it somewhat lighter. This one worked out okay insofar as, you got the cat up there with the glowing eyes and everything. But see how everything is kind of dark?
Yeah.
Make your photograph a little lighter than you think it should be.
And the operator is wearing a dark shirt, which doesn't help matters either.
That doesn't help matters either, and it was probably taken on a smartphone. And smartphones, I tell you, you can take some fantastic photos on a smartphone, but they don't have the range that taking it professionally might have. So if you can, if you've got a nice camera, take it with a nice camera, but don't be ashamed to do it on a smartphone. Let you in on a little secret. Since there have been cutbacks at the Gazette, some of the reporters use smartphones for the pictures that are actually printed in the newspaper. And newspapers are doing that more and more. So with proper light, you can get a halfway decent picture. Politics, anything risque. I did that cartoon years ago for one of the ARRL books. This is what you don't talk about on the air, despite what you might hear on 75 meters. No politics, no religion. I'm not talking about not saying God bless or something like that, but don't go overboard on that. And nothing risque too. Think about how you would talk to somebody that you didn't know all that well. Would you go in that direction? No, and I think when you do the risque stuff, and I hate to say it, I've seen some of that on Facebook, it makes the YLs feel unwelcome. Yes. So just keep it nice and clean.
You have a lot of kids too.
Kids as well, So, and also recognize that if you are talking with somebody in a foreign country and you send them a QSL card and you send them a highly political QSL card and somebody sees it, you could get them in trouble. Keep it polite, keep it nice. I put up these QSL cards. These, for the most part, do appear to have been professionally done, but they're examples of something that has to do with where they're from and extremely simple, except for that one right up there. That one there, simple photograph of where the guy is. This one was for a special event station for the mining industry. This is the French amateur and where he lived. Isn't that beautiful? Think about talking to somebody who lived there and think, wonder what that guy's shack is like. You did see a picture of a shack here. I thought he got carried away a little bit with too many photographs. I would have simplified it a little bit. But, one or two inset photographs to see the shack. I mean, I think this is unnecessary since you've got all that green up there. But that one up in the corner, I don't know what the meaning of that is, so I think it's unnecessary too. But the other two are fine. And this Japanese card, does anybody know what Blue Impulse is? I think it's like the Japanese version of Blue Angels with Thunderbirds. I think. But that's kind of cool. And look how simple these are. One idea, one idea, one idea. Try not to jam everything in there if you can help it. You don't have to do horizontal cards. You can do a vertical card too, as long as it's 3.5 by 5.5. It sorts just fine. These are both from Atlanta. The fella has a two-call, but that's downtown Atlanta with the Centennial Olympic Park there in the foreground. This one obviously done professionally. They got a professional illustration. But the point is, you can do it vertical. You have an image that you think would look better that way? Do it vertical. Now, for your QSL card, I know it's really tempting to go on the internet and grab something because it's on the internet and you can. Generally, that's not a good idea. First of all, somebody else owns it. Somebody else owns it. Now, if you ask for their permission and then use it, that's a different thing. But there are technical reasons as well. Resolution for websites is too low to look good printed. We get this all the time at the Gazette. Somebody sends us their logo from their website, And we can't print it as big as they want because it would look all jagged around the edges and it would be blurry. Generally, the stuff you get off the internet is going to be too blurry to print and look nice. There are exceptions, but in general, that's the case. So if you are going to use something off the internet, ask them first and make sure it's sufficiently high resolution. Generally, 200 to 300 DPI, or dots per inch, at the size you want to print it at. I've even gone as low as 150. Will look good enough. If you don't have any way to figure out what that is, if the file is smaller than about a megabyte, it's probably too small. So you're wondering, well, if I don't have an image, are any of you good photographers? You can take a picture if you can do that, but if you don't, you could go to a stock service. We do it all the time for advertisements. You can get, say, a skyline, a professionally done skyline of Oklahoma City, for example, for $15. Sufficiently high resolution to make it look good. And you've got all the rights to it. You aren't breaking any laws, you aren't stealing anybody else's work, and it's gonna look good from the get-go. And these are some of the stock sources that I've used. We use Big Stock at the Gazette. I've used Shutterstock, Dreamstime, Stock Fresh. There are others. Just go ahead and Google stock image services. As far as printers, I'm trying to think how to say this. My wife has worked in printing too, and she often gets these, or she used to get these files in, somebody did them on Microsoft Publisher or something like that. And she would just tear her hair out when she'd get something like that, or in Word, and if they expected it to be printed directly from that. It's a good way to show the printer what you want, but professional printers can't use those files. If they do, it probably won't look really good. So what you really want to do, unless you feel comfortable doing some of this stuff yourself, I do, but you may not, choose a printer who specializes in QSL cards. They're going to understand your needs, they're going to be able to walk you through it, and you can look up to see what kind of reputation they have. You can go to eham.net, for example, and get ratings of the various QSL printers. These are three that I know of. I haven't used cheap QSLs, but I've heard good things about them. They have pre-formatted QSL cards, and they are cheap. KB3 IFH QSL, excuse me, that's Randy Dorman. Early to print my QSLs before I took matters into my own hands there, but he is very, very good, and I recommend him highly, and his prices are competitive. Now, if you're daring and you want to go overseas, some of the foreign printers will give you one heck of a price. And when I've had to create DX cards for people, it's easier for me to send the file over to a printer that's already over there than have it mailed from the United States. What you got?
On the UX printer, he has an agent in the United States. So you send all the information to the agent, and he'll forward it over to, I think it's Lithuania. And he will, he'll get it done, and the cards will come, and he's very, very prompt and very, very good about getting back with you. But as far as paying for it, you just use his agent in Iowa or Nebraska or wherever he is.
I had forgotten about that, but yeah, you're right. And that does make it hear anything like that involved.
Right.
Yeah. No, I swear. I've been doing HamToons. It's a website devoted to my cartoons and cartoon QSLs for a while now, maybe 4 or 5 years. And I lived in Atlanta. My wife was up in Independence, Missouri, or near Independence, Missouri, near Kansas City. And she was editing her club newsletter. And her call sign, I tell you what, I am not wishing that my wife die before I do, but if she does, I want her call sign. It's N2ART. Into art. She's a graphic designer too.
Cool.
Anyway, she wanted to do something a little bit different for her club newsletter, and she found my website. And it was something that kind of interested her because she was a graphic designer. So she was married. I was otherwise involved. But she sent me some questions, and I was really flattered, so I answered them, sent them back, and we friended each other on Facebook. Now, how many of you have friends on Facebook that are there in the background and you don't see them for like a year or 2 years? Exactly. Well, that was the end of it for about a year and a half. And then about a year and a half later, I was free, she was free. We just started talking and click. So that is another argument for having a good QSL. Chicks dig them.